I noticed it before I understood it. The birds stopped first. I live at the edge of the woods, close enough that I usually wake up to some kind of sound moving through the trees, wind through leaves, birds arguing over territory, the occasional deer picking its way through the underbrush. This morning there was nothing. Not silence like early morning silence. A different kind. The kind that has weight to it. The kind you can feel pressing against your ears before you even know why. I stepped outside, still half asleep, coffee in hand, and I stood there for a full 10 seconds before my brain caught up with what my eyes were already looking at. The forest wasn't green anymore. It wasn't brown, wasn't autumn gold, wasn't any color a forest should be. It was catching the morning light in long, sharp reflections, throwing it back at me in fractured lines, the way sunlight hits a window at exactly the wrong angle. Every tree, every branch, every single leaf, frozen mid-motion, hardened into something that looked like it belonged in a museum case, not rooted in the ground behind my house. I walked closer before I even decided to. I remember that clearly, my legs moving without checking in with the rest of me first. The first tree I touched. It was an oak. The same oak that stood at the edge of my property for as long as I've lived here, easily older than the house itself. I put my hand against the trunk, expecting bark, rough and familiar, and instead felt something smooth and cool, hard in a way wood has never been hard, with a texture underneath my palm that felt less like touching a surface and more like touching the memory of one. I could still see the bark. That's the detail that stayed with me the longest. Every ridge, every groove, every place where the wood had split and healed itself over decades, still visible, still perfectly detailed, just rendered now in something transparent and glass-like instead of the living material it used to be. It was the tree, exactly as it had always looked, except now I could see straight through parts of it, down through where the trunk should have been solid, catching glimpses of the light on the other side. I knocked on it. I don't know why. Some instinct told me to check if it would sound the way glass sounds, and it did. That same high, clean ring you get from tapping a wine glass, except it came from a tree that had been standing in that exact spot since before I was born. My neighbor's reaction. My neighbor, an older man named Frank, who's lived next to this property even longer than I have, was standing at his own fence line when I came back around front, staring into his side of the same tree line, with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, somewhere between grief and disbelief. Frank spent decades of his retirement maintaining a small trail through his portion of the woods, and he told me, in a voice quieter than I'd ever heard from him, that he'd already walked out to check on a specific tree, one he'd apparently planted himself as a much younger man, decades ago, for reasons he didn't elaborate on, and I didn't push him to explain. He found it exactly like every other tree, transformed, silent, frozen in the exact shape it had held the evening before. He stood at his fence for a long time after telling me that, not saying anything else, just looking at the glass tree line the way you'd look at something that used to be a person, walking in. I want to be honest that walking into the forest that morning was one of the more frightening things I've done, not because anything was actively threatening me, but because everything about it violated something I didn't know I relied on so completely. The assumption that a forest is alive, that it moves, that it responds, even in small, quiet ways, to wind and weather and time. This forest did none of that. My footsteps were the only sound for as far as I walked, and even those sounded wrong, echoing slightly off the glass trunks in a way dirt and living trees never would have allowed. Leaves that should have crunched or rustled underfoot instead lay frozen exactly where they'd fallen, caught in mid-decay, translucent and still holding their shape instead of crumbling the way a dead leaf should. I found a spot deeper in, where a small stream used to run, one I'd walked past 100 times over the years. The water was gone, or rather, it wasn't gone at all. It was still there, following the exact path it always had, except now it was a solid, unmoving ribbon of glass tracing the stream bed's curve, catching light in a way that almost fooled me into thinking, for just a second, that it was still flowing. What I found in the clearing. About 20 minutes in, I reached a clearing I know well, a spot where the trees open up enough to see a decent stretch of sky. That's where I found the deer. 2 of them, a doe and what looked like a yearling, standing exactly as they must have been standing the moment whatever happened, happened. Not lying down, not in any posture suggesting they'd suffered or struggled, just standing, mid-step, ears slightly forward, glass down to the finest details, individual strands of what used to be fur, now rendered as fine, delicate lines across a transparent surface. I stood in front of them for a long time, long enough that I started noticing my own reflection faintly in the doe's glass eye, distorted and small, staring back at me from inside a creature that used to be alive an unknown number of hours earlier. I didn't touch them. I'm still not entirely sure why. Some instinct telling me that whatever separates things I should approach from things I shouldn't still applied here, even if I couldn't explain the reasoning behind it. What the reports are saying. By the time I made it back to cell signal, my phone was already flooded, and it became clear within minutes that this wasn't isolated to the woods behind my house. Every major forest system reporting in, the Amazon, the Congo Basin, the boreal forests across Canada and Russia, all of it, every tree, all transformed in what satellite imagery is now suggesting was a nearly simultaneous event, occurring within the same narrow window worldwide, regardless of local time zone. Scientists who've managed to get equipment out to affected areas are describing the transformed material as structurally identical to the original organic matter in every measurable way except composition. Same growth rings, same cellular patterns, same evidence of decades or centuries of growth, all preserved in perfect, frozen detail, just made of something that behaves like glass under every test they've run so far. No one's been able to explain how something can retain that level of biological information while no longer being biological at all. Reports from areas closer to human settlement describe a similar pattern to what I found. Any animal caught within a forest's boundary at the moment of transformation appears to have been affected as well, frozen in the same glass-like state as the trees around them, while animals in open, non-forested areas nearby were left completely untouched. What the research teams are finding. A university research team, granted emergency access to a section of protected forest about 90 minutes from where I live, released a preliminary statement 2 days ago that's been circulating heavily online. According to their early findings, the transformed material doesn't just resemble organic matter structurally, it appears to retain something closer to a preserved biological signature, as though whatever process caused this transformation didn't destroy the tree's original composition so much as it replaced it, atom by atom, without disturbing the underlying pattern at all. One detail from their statement has stuck with me more than anything else in the entire report. Core samples drilled from several affected trees show that the transformation appears to run completely uniform all the way through, no denser at the surface, no different at the center, as if the entire tree changed in a single, instantaneous moment, rather than through any process that would naturally start at one point and spread outward. Whatever did this didn't work its way through the forest. It simply happened everywhere within a forest's boundary, all at once. The same way a photograph captures an entire scene simultaneously, rather than one detail at a time. The boundary line. This is the detail that's kept me from sleeping properly. I went back out yesterday, this time deliberately, to walk the edge where the forest meets my backyard. The exact boundary line between transformed and untransformed. It's clean, unnaturally clean, not a gradual fade, not a patchy, inconsistent transition, the way you'd expect from any natural phenomenon, weather, disease, temperature change, any of it. It's a line, almost surgical in its precision, glass on one side, living grass and soil on the other, sometimes cutting directly through a single root system where part of a tree's root extended just past the tree line into my yard. That section still soft, still organic, still alive, while 3 feet away, the rest of the same root system had already turned. I don't know what determines that boundary. Forestry officials interviewed on the news keep using the word arbitrary. But standing there myself, looking at a line too precise to be arbitrary, I don't believe that's the right word at all. It felt less like an accident, and more like a decision, made by something that knew exactly where a forest's edge was defined, down to the root. Frank came out while I was examining that boundary line, and without me asking, he pointed out something I hadn't noticed myself. His fence, the actual wooden fence posts marking his property line, remained completely untouched, ordinary wood, even though several fence posts stood less than a foot from trees that had fully transformed. Whatever this is, it seems to recognize the difference between a tree and a piece of cut, processed lumber, treating them as fundamentally different categories even when they're standing side by side, made of what was once the exact same material. What happens now? Nobody has a working theory yet, not one that survives contact with the actual physical evidence. It isn't fossilization. That takes far longer than overnight and produces stone, not glass. It isn't any known chemical or environmental process capable of acting on this scale, simultaneously, across every forest on Earth regardless of climate, species, or geography. What I keep coming back to is the silence I noticed first, before I understood anything else. Birds gone, insects gone, Every sound a forest usually makes, gone in the same instant the trees themselves stopped being trees. It wasn't a slow death. It was an instant, complete removal of everything that made a forest a living system, replaced with something that still looks exactly right, from a distance, until you're standing close enough to knock on a tree trunk and hear glass answer back. I keep thinking about how much of the planet's oxygen used to come from places like the one behind my house. I don't have an answer for what that means yet, not one I'm ready to write down. What I do know is that the boundary line at the edge of my yard hasn't moved since yesterday. But I also know, somehow, standing at it, that it hasn't finished deciding where it ends either. Subscribe to Anime Echo Tales, because some mornings, the world doesn't just change. It stops, mid-breath, and waits to see who's still watching.